A deal is on the table. Netanyahu should take it. That's reportedly the advice from Israel's defence chief. But can the Prime Minister be swayed? His expanded Gaza operation is continuing despite pleas from hostage families, international pressure and the declaration of a famine. Is he putting the hostages and civilians at risk? Join us for the debate on CounterPoints with me, Melinda Nucifora. A recent airstrike on the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis has significantly increased domestic and international pressure on Israel. 20 people were killed, including 5 journalists who were at the hospital reporting on an earlier attack. It comes just 2 weeks after 6 journalists were killed near a hospital in Gaza City. Now, in a statement on social media, the Israeli Defence Force said, and I quote, that it regrets any harm to uninvolved individuals. It went on to say it does not target journalists as such. But is it doing enough to mitigate civilian casualties? It's these kinds of large-scale and seemingly indiscriminate bombings that have some families of the hostages worried. They say Netanyahu's Gaza City offensive is a death sentence for their loved ones. The IDF Chief of Staff is being quoted as saying, "There is a deal on the table. We need to take it." Coming up on this episode of CounterPoints, we'll ask, will the Gaza City offensive put hostages at risk? Is the operation a negotiating tool for Israel? And is Israel doing enough to prevent civilian deaths? Stay with us. Before we get into this episode's debate, we have a special interview to bring you. Joining CounterPoints is Ruby Chen. His son, Itai Chen, is an Israeli US-German citizen. The IDF soldier was taken hostage by Hamas on October 7. He's one of 50 captives still being held in Gaza. Mr. Chen, your willingness to discuss such a sensitive topic is greatly appreciated here on Al Arabiya English. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, let's start with you and your family. How is everyone and how are you dealing with these intense emotions that have now gone on for 22 months?
Yeah, we're not in good shape. When this started, we thought we were in a sprint, trying to get our kid back home. But we did not know that it was not a sprint, but actually a marathon. And even today, any marathon that you participate in, you know how to pace yourself to get to the finish line. Here, we do not know where that finish line is, and therefore it is even more difficult to process and to understand what is the next best action for us to do today, the next hour, the next minute.
It must be unbearably painful, and you've spoken in the past in reference to earlier phased hostage release deals about feeling as if your son Itai had been forgotten. Do you think the initial hostage deals were a mistake?
Well, I think the mediators, well-intended, I think after 22 months have not been successful because there still is a humanitarian crisis of hostages in Gaza, as well as the fact that Palestinian people living in Gaza also are in a humanitarian crisis and are being used as human shields where fighting is going on in populated areas. And I think that the international community as a whole has failed us. I feel sometimes that we are collateral damage, for lack of a better term, because we're just simple people, both us and those people in Gaza that do not have a voice, and we're just stuck in this.
What about the current proposal from the mediators that's on the table? Hamas has agreed to it. Do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu should take it?
So I think here as well, we are in a domain of inaccurate information. We do not have the full picture. I could share with you that I have urged the Qataris to go public and be able to convey exactly what Hamas said yes to, what were their conditions, and let it be known to the international community what Hamas is willing to accept and why at the moment it seems that we are on the verge of another vicious cycle of fighting. And where is that international intervention to prevent from that happening?
Do you think that expanded fighting that you're referring to there, the Gaza City operation, do you think it will put the hostages at greater risk, or do you think it could get them out?
So, this is a question that is in dispute also within the Israeli society. We see that the President of the United States is backing the Prime Minister of Israel that believes that this is the way to get all the hostages out. But again, we live in a time of unknown information that is not pleasant to us, and it's very difficult for us to be able to articulate a position. But I feel again that the bottom line is the bottom line, and this has not changed. 22 months, 687 days. This has been going on for too long. And so many people have been killed. Hostages that we know were alive, 42 of them have been killed in captivity. And we still have 50 hostages. And the question is, what is required in order for us to be whole again as families and also end that suffering that is in Gaza as well? And I, for the love of God, do not understand. We are all children of God. We walk this planet together. There are some basic principles that we all, as human beings, need to adhere to, regardless of your religion. And I don't understand why, for 22 months, we have not been able to find a compromise that A, allows the hostages to come out, B, end the suffering of the people in Gaza, and be able to find some sort of better future. We have paid a very significant price for that savage attack of Hamas on civilians. And I think that we have all had enough of that, and we need to find a better way for a better path for the future.
Can you describe your interactions with the Israeli administration? Do you feel heard? Do you feel represented? And has that been constant, or has it changed since the initial phases of the war?
So I'm also a U.S. citizen. So as a U.S. citizen, we have a comparison. So from the United States, State Department has provided us a platform. It's called SPIHA, Special President Envoy for Hostage Affairs. It's unfortunate, but at any given moment, there are dozens of U.S. hostages being held against their will in many places. So with them, we have a very ongoing conversation. There's a weekly call. We, of course, have, well, it shouldn't be as a given, but we have unique access to the White House and to the administration. I feel from the Israeli side, yes, the magnitude is much different. And at the beginning, they needed to set up some sort of infrastructure. At the moment, there is an infrastructure, but when it comes to sharing information about exactly what's going on and what are the plans, then we are just as much in the dark as the media. Well, we do not get accurate information. And as you've been asking me, it's very difficult to form an opinion when it's based on only partial information. We only know the bottom line. And that is that my son has been missing for 687 days. Hamas, which is, very unfortunate that this is the path that they have decided, but they have not to this day provided any acknowledgement that Ittai is in their possession, and B, what his physical status is. And this is against many international treaties that discuss about people missing in areas of conflict, and there's some basic conduct that has been passed by the UN and other humanitarian organizations that any organization needs to agreed to, and they have denied doctors coming in, any type of medical attention. And again, I asked the international community, why is that legitimate? And why is there not a higher, larger outcry? And again, I also speak on the Palestinian side. I think there are people that are starving. We could argue, is it because of a distribution issue that Hamas takes a lot of that and then they sell it on the black market? But it is a problem. And why is there no international intervention that puts an end to this?
It is of such a painful position that you're in. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, to express your experiences and your concerns. Ruby Chen, father of IDF soldier Itai Chen, thank you very much for joining us here on CounterPoints.
Thank you for having me. God bless, and let's put an end to this.
Well, let's turn to our debate now and discuss the latest on Israel's Gaza offensive. I'm joined by Ksenia Svetlova, the Executive Director of ROPES, the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. She's also a former Knesset member. Also joining our panel, Professor Mekhaima Abusada, visiting lecturer at Northwestern University, and before that, he taught at Al-Azhar University in Gaza. And rounding out our panel, Jake Wallace-Simons, Telegraph columnist, broadcaster and author. Thank you all for joining me here on CounterPoints. Now, despite domestic and international criticism, the Israeli government remains adamant that the only and perhaps the best way to defeat Hamas is to take full control of Gaza City. Now, France's President Emmanuel Macron says the offensive would be a true disaster, and I quote, and according to Germany, it is, and I quote again, increasingly difficult to understand how these actions will lead to the freeing of all the hostages. So if we focus on the Gaza offensive first, Jake, let's start with you. Will the Gaza City offensive put hostages at greater risk, or will it make them safer?
Well, that is a question which is at the heart of all this and is extremely difficult to answer. There's difference of opinion in the political leadership of Israel and in the IDF and, of course, around the world. I suppose the real question is that this war will not end until those hostages are freed. And obviously the decision that the Prime Minister made was that military pressure is the only way to force Hamas either to release them or at least to return to the negotiating table. We've seen over the last almost 2 years of this war that every single hostage deal has arisen because of military pressure applied to Hamas, leaving their backs against the wall. That's when concessions can be got out of Hamas. Unfortunately, when that military pressure is lifted, Hamas just is unresponsive and wishes to just carry on holding the hostages forevermore. So I think that is the decision made by the Prime Minister. Of course, as you alluded to, it's a very contentious decision. It's not one that everybody agrees to, and nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows how this thing is going to play out. But I think it just speaks of the desperation, really, of Israel as the world turns against it to get this war done, get their people back, and defeat Hamas.
Mekhaima, what do you think? Is this Gaza City offensive going to be more risky, or is it a way to force Hamas to negotiate?
Well, many thanks, Melinda, for hosting me, and hello to everybody, to Jake and Ksenia. Well, it's a very good question. Let me say that there are efforts which are basically done by Egypt, the main mediator, and also Qatar to try to broker a ceasefire, even though it's a partial ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which would allow the release of 10 Israeli hostages and roughly more than half of the dead bodies. But unfortunately, the Israeli cabinet has basically stalled on that. They haven't said yes, they haven't said no. And what we hear is that there are Israeli preparations for the advancement into Gaza City. And it seems to me that the Israeli cabinet has made its mind that they are going to conquer what they call it the capital of Hamas, which is Gaza City, which is housing roughly about 1 million Palestinians now. Now, I do really hope that Israel will rethink its position, will rethink its plans to take control over Gaza City and the whole of the Gaza Strip. But if Israel goes along with its military preparations and its military advancement into Gaza, it seems to me that that's going to be a very difficult call. Looking at what has happened over the past 22 months since October 7th of 2023, there were incidents in which the Israeli army came closer to rescue those Israeli hostages, and I think there were clear instructions to the guards, the Hamas guards who are guarding those Israeli hostages, to kill them. Unfortunately, there was an incident, or more than one incident, in which some of these Israeli hostages were killed by their guards, and there were many incidents in which some of those Israeli hostages were killed by the Israeli army. There was an incident in Shuja'iyya in which 3 Israeli hostages were shot and killed by the Israeli army, even though they were raising a white flag. There were also other incidents in which some of those hostages were killed inside the tunnel. So the life of those Israeli hostages will be definitely in danger if Israel advances into Gaza City or other areas of Gaza, which could be the middle area of Gaza after Gaza City.
Ksenia, what's your take on, if we focus specifically on the safety of the hostages first, we're going to come to the ceasefire a little bit later. What's the sense you're getting? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism that this is going to put the hostages at more risk.
Well, Melinda, for tomorrow, Tuesday, in Israel, a day of disruption is scheduled. And this move is being led actually by the families of the hostages. The families of the hostages are fearful for their lives, of their loved ones. They believe that Netanyahu's government is not about to release during the takeover the Gaza City, but it actually has a different idea in mind, a different goal in mind, which is completing the control over the Gaza City, perhaps for the sake of creating, I don't know, settlements in northern Gaza in order to appease the right-wing ministers. So as just my friend Hammer just said now, a chilling example of the execution of the hostages by Hamas when they felt that the IDF forces were near them. Well, we just marked a 1-year anniversary of the murder of the 6 hostages. And, you know, I still remember very much their names being included time and again in a possible deal where they could be released. Well, not a perfect deal, but a partial deal is now on the table. It was confirmed by President Trump, who indicated that Hamas is ready to free 10 hostages immediately. We can save 10 lives, or we can sacrifice 10 lives. So this is a question, I think, that, you know, that's the most important question, I think, not only for me, for many, many Israelis. This is the essence of this war. The hostages need to go back. Only after that, Israel will be able to breathe again and to rebuild itself again, to restore its inner security. Without that, there could be no sense of security without getting the hostages back alive, not as bodies.
Jake, what do you make on, one thing I pick up from what Ksenia was saying there is this idea that even though the Israeli government says it is going to take control, but it doesn't want to govern Gaza City. It doesn't want to annex the region. This is purely to root out Hamas from its tunnels. Can you see a concern from some people that maybe that's just all words and this occupation could go further? Is that a concern?
I can certainly see that there are those concerns, particularly amongst on the left and in the international community. I mean, look, there are people who've been saying that Netanyahu has been wanting to resettle Gaza even from before the war. There are people who characterize him as one of the far-right ministers in his government. But in truth, he doesn't share those views, as far as I can see. He does have those far-right ministers in his government, which is unfortunate, and I certainly hold no sympathies for them. But it seems to me that they don't have the final say over the operations of his government. Now, look, this is just a subjective judgment call. People who hate Netanyahu, think he's corrupt, think he's wrong, think he's a warmonger, will say that this is just a disingenuous attempt to occupy Gaza and take control of it, settlement by stealth. People who have more time for him, who can see the predicament that he's in, trying to lead a war-torn and beleaguered country to victory over a ruthless enemy that began this war, have more time for him. Personally, I tend to give him the benefit of the doubt. Again, I have no candle for those far-right ministers, but I think that it would be quite a big accusation to say that he is prolonging this awful war with the blood of tens of thousands of people on his hands, effectively, just for his own political survival and at the beck and call of those far-right ministers. I don't feel that is correct. I think he is doing his best to get the hostages freed and to end this war by defeating Hamas. But again, it's a judgment call, and this is a very tragic and painful situation for all concerned.
Mukhaima, what do you think of that? Is he prolonging the war for his own political survival, or does he have a long-term strategy in mind?
Well, Melinda, as I stated earlier, there is a ceasefire proposal which was put forward by the American presidential envoy Steve Witkoff a few months ago, and this deal was, so to speak, redefined by Egypt lately, and Hamas accepted that deal about a week ago. Now, I totally disagree with Jake that Netanyahu is not basically using the hostages for prolonging the war and also for his own political survival. If the Israeli opposition, leaders of the Israeli opposition like Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, Avigdor Lieberman, and also the families of the Israeli hostages are all saying that there is a deal, this deal can be implemented, even though, as I mentioned earlier, this is a partial deal, which can become an end game or a comprehensive deal. But it seems to me that Netanyahu, who is being under pressure by some of the right-wing ministers in his own cabinet, like Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, and also Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister of National Security, they basically are threatening Netanyahu to withdraw from the current coalition government if Netanyahu strikes a deal, a partial deal that will put a ceasefire for about 60 days. So basically, it seems to me, and as I mentioned, this is not me saying that, leaders of the Israeli opposition, families of the hostages are basically saying that Netanyahu is basically not listening, and even Benny Gantz offered to join the current coalition government to basically stop the right-wing ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich from blackmailing Netanyahu and the current coalition government. But unfortunately, we will have basically to wait and see how the Israeli cabinet is going to decide tomorrow, because supposedly there is a meeting for the Israeli cabinet tomorrow, and they will decide whether to send an Israeli delegation somewhere. They haven't decided whether it's going to be in Cairo or Doha to negotiate for the latest Egyptian proposal for, as I mentioned, a partial ceasefire.
I'm going to come to the ceasefire in just a moment, but before I move on to that, Ksenia, I just want to ask you, we've heard from former defense bosses who've questioned whether Hamas can actually be destroyed. I mean, if you take a look at ISIS, they may have been defeated, but they're certainly not gone. Is the Prime Minister fighting a losing battle here?
Well, unlike my colleague here, Jake, I absolutely believe that Netanyahu cannot be trusted with the decision-making at the current point. Yes, because there are too many circumstances that make his decision not pure. And yes, this is the criminal court against him. And yes, this is his dependence on the extreme right ministers. Many unprecedented things that he did not support before are actually happening now, like the decision, for example, to support the construction of the settlements in the E1 zone. He was himself against it, and now he supports it. So the situation changes, and this is very fluid. So I think that the very elusive promise that he made in the beginning of the war to eradicate Hamas fully, what does it actually mean? Because if the war will continue, well, you know, the last Hamas terrorist will be born tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, because they will recruit more and more and more. and they will hold the guerrilla fighting. And yes, they will be weaker than will still exist. If he promises to have Gaza clean from Hamas control, yes, that can be achieved. This is definitely a goal that could be achieved. But listen, this deal was on the table by November 2023. It was proposed by President to bring back the Palestinian Authority, to bring the Arab armies that for the first time, as much as I can remember, Egypt, Jordan, other countries offer to have peacekeeping forces inside Gaza Strip and to help Palestinian Authority to have a grip over Gaza. So this is a goal that actually can be achieved. But since, again, we have this impossible situation in which Netanyahu cannot have any kind of partnership with the Palestinian Authority. He is waging a war against them for the last 10 years. I was in Knesset when he started this campaign against Abu Mazen personally. Before that, it was okay, but since 2015, he became a persona non grata and then a terrorist. Yes, so that's why he continues the war. He makes this impossible promises of, well, we'll completely eradicate Hamas. And we heard it many times before. So the last bastion used to be the Rafah. We'll take over Rafah and then you'll see everything will change. And Netanyahu himself, the prime minister, said time and again, the victory is just a few steps away. It was said more than 1.5 years ago.
I'm going to come to you, Jake, for a response, but let me just introduce our next section. I want to focus on this ceasefire that we've been alluding to since our discussion began. Israeli aircraft and tanks have been pounding the eastern and the northern outskirts of Gaza City, but ground troops aren't expected to move into the city centre for a few more weeks. In the meantime, Netanyahu has instructed his negotiators to work towards the release of all hostages. So that's no more partial deals. Jake, respond to what some of our panellists have been saying. They question whether Netanyahu should be given the benefit of the doubt, which is your position. What's your take? Is the Gaza City operation just a negotiating tool? Do you think Netanyahu really believes that he can defeat Hamas by taking control of Gaza City?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points to make really in response. The first one is your one about the Islamic State, about how the supposed impossibility of destroying Hamas. I mean, Islamic State is a great example because they have been destroyed as a political entity. There's no longer a territory called Islamic State. There are no longer those head-chopping videos of James Foley and the other poor people who were killed several years ago. They no longer
command. But as an ideology, they still exist. I mean, in the refugee camps in Idlib, they're still a concern.
Of course, and you're right that you can't kill an ideology with a bullet, but you damn sure can get rid of their political power. You can remove them from authority. You can stop them from being a force resembling a light infantry corps, which they did on October the 7th. And then you can begin the process of de-radicalization. We beat the Nazis in Nazi Germany. After we beat them militarily, we de-radicalized Germany and Japan, of course, and that led to those flourishing societies several decades on today. And so it is possible to do that. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it will be accomplished. I'm saying that it's possible to defeat an evil ideology that holds territory and that threatens you. Now, with regard to the partial deal and releasing 10 hostages or 50 or whatever the numbers are, I can see Netanyahu's position because Hamas is waging a war not really of guns and bullets. It's waging a war of public opinion. It thrives upon the propaganda of hiding amongst civilians, causing civilian casualties when Israel attacks Hamas's positions, and then using that footage of horrible suffering of civilians to evoke public sympathy around the world, to make people forget who started this war, to make people forget who the jihadis are, to make people forget who are prolonging it by keeping the hostages, and instead to reframe this as some kind of quote-unquote genocide, which it isn't, carried out by Israel in an unprovoked way. So they've managed to install this fabrication in the minds of millions upon millions of people around the world, particularly in the West, of course, in the Arab world as well. And that is beginning to drive the decisions and the motivations and the positions of leaders around the world who are one by one lining up behind the idea of a unilateral declaration of statehood for the Palestinians. Now, Hamas is playing that game. It's progressing week by week and month by month. Netanyahu can feel it. He can feel that the world is turning against him because it is principally manipulated by Hamas propaganda unfairly and in the hands of this jihadi sort of manipulation. And he knows that time is running out. This thing has got to be finished for that reason. Also, of course, for the reason of human suffering, which should be the principal one. Let's not forget that. But the way to get this done is to get the hostages back. Hamas is trying to string it out. It can feel that Israel's on the ropes in terms of international opinion. It can see Israel getting more and more isolated. In terms of the shooting war, Israel is winning. But in terms of the international opinion war, Hamas is winning. And this thing needs to be done. We cannot allow Hamas to string this out further with the blood of the hostages as some kind of price. It's got to be done. And Netanyahu has taken this decision, which again is contentious, but this is the one that he's taken. And I do hope and pray that it works.
Makaima, what do you make to some of those points Jake has just expressed?
Well, let me set the record straight here and just mention a few points here. Jake, while this conflict did not start on October 7 of 2023, this conflict has been going on for decades now as a result of Israel occupying Palestinian land, West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem on June.
It withdrew from Gaza in 2005.
1967. And the Palestinians have been basically struggling for their political rights over the past 5-6 decades. Now, this is the longest modern occupation in modern history. That there is an Israeli occupation over more than 5 million Palestinians who live in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And look, even at what has been happening lately, an international conference was basically sponsored by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in New York to advance the two-state solution. And the only two countries who are against that basically is Israel and the U.S. And now it seems to me that with continued Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and with the settlement plans for E1, that will definitely put the two-state solution behind our backs if Israel continues with that. So, and that's one thing. The other thing, I mean, look, Gaza is a very small territory which is inhabited with more than 2 million people. And I think when you look at the numbers, and that was very much said by the British newspaper Independent on relying on Israeli media outlets, and I think up until May of this year, 2025, they basically documented the death of 52,000 Palestinians. Roughly 18% of those are Hamas militants by names, and the rest of roughly 83% of those Palestinians who were killed are Palestinian civilians, men, women, children, who were basically killed as a result of this ongoing war for the past 22 months. So basically, we don't really know exactly what's happening, and I do really ask that the Israeli government allow international media to go into the Gaza Strip and see what's happening. I mean,
I just want to ask you, Makaima, you talk about the suffering there. This is effectively, the deal that's on the table is effectively the same deal that Israel agreed to back in July. So Hamas could have ended all of this suffering for its own people so much sooner, couldn't it? I mean, they shoulder some of the blame here.
Well, Melinda, this is a very good question. I'm not here trying to defend Hamas. I definitely agree with you. Had Hamas accepted this deal back in July, we would not be in this position again. We would probably, a ceasefire was agreed in late July of this year. But unfortunately, Hamas is trying to maximize its gains, not knowing that what's going to happen. But it seems to me that the pressure which was put on Hamas lately by the Egyptians, the Qataris, and also by other Palestinian factions made Hamas accept the deal that was on the table on July. Now, again, I'm not saying that Hamas is innocent here. They basically to be blamed for a number of things. First of all, the attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, killing of Israeli civilians, women and children, and that is not acceptable to the Palestinians. That is against international law, and I think that the record is straight forward here.
Okay, I'm just going to move us on. I just need to keep an eye on. I just need to keep an eye on the time. So, Ksenia, let me bring you in here. What do you make of both of those positions? I mean, especially Jake's assertion that this could very well be what needs to happen to get Hamas to agree to a deal, that Netanyahu can only play with the cards that he's been dealt?
Well, I can just tell you that for the last 22 months, the demonstrations that are being held in Israel, the slogan that is being used constantly is to release them all, end the war, and release all of them. So the Israeli society that by far supports the ending of the war and release of the hostages by 75 to 80% consistently for the almost 2 years, it demands not a partial deal, but actually the whole deal. It was Netanyahu, though, who for many, many months, he rejected the partial deal. He rejected the full deal. He said, well, I do not want to end the war. We cannot end the war. There were rumors that the war should last for another year, perhaps a year and a half. There were this kind of estimations just a few months ago that, it should last another year. And now when, we understand that the hostages are dying. Have you seen their faces? Have you seen their bodies? They are emaciated. They are dying. And we heard very concerning news from President Trump time and again, who indicated that, despite the news that we are being informed by the IDF and our government, that there are at least 1 or 2 hostages that are dead by now, and they were alive just a few weeks ago. So the time is running out. Hamas is a heinous terrorist organization, and it was people like me sitting in the opposition who in 2017 and 18 consistently, repeatedly said to Netanyahu, to his government, you are doing a huge mistake. You cannot feed the terrorists. You cannot sponsor them with Qatari money. You also cannot do deals with Qatar itself. Yes, it's a dangerous country. It's a supporter of Muslim Brotherhood. Nothing good will come out of it. Nobody heard to us. Nobody heard to me. I wrote articles about it. I spoke about it. And, today when our hostages are dying, I think that any deal is good enough. We need to get them out. I'm not counting on Hamas, to suddenly, prove that they're human or something like this. They are worse than beasts. When we saw the crimes that they did against their own people, first of all, and I covered Gaza as a correspondent also. I was in Gaza many, many times. I met Mukhaimer there at the time. It was even before the, Hamas came into power. And of course, they made heinous, unimaginable crimes against my people. But it doesn't mean that I should allow them to continue killing our hostages. Again, they were, their trust was breached, the trust with the Israeli government, not with Hamas. I did not have any trust with Hamas. For me, they are enemies. But the Palestinian people in general are not my enemies. And I do not agree that with my name, the war will continue without getting the hostages, without eradicating Hamas, and also without basically bringing all of the suffering to an end and bringing security to people of Israel and to Palestinian people. If they will not have security. And yes, Hamas is an enemy. We have to fight against it. But the continuation of the war is diplomacy. This stage never came. I felt that, after a few months of war, it's time. It's time to wrap up and to talk about the day after. Unfortunately, until this very day, there was not one discussion in the Israeli cabinet about what will happen to Gaza after Hamas will be eradicated. Netanyahu refuses to talk about it. And yes, there are political explanations and circumstances behind that.
Okay. You mentioned, we've been mentioning journalists not being allowed into Gaza. We've been talking about civilian casualties. Monday has been particularly deadly for journalists, specifically in Gaza. There's vision of civil defence workers in high visibility vests and journalists in press jackets at the scene of a bombing trying to rescue a photographer when that exact same spot is hit again by a second airstrike. Almost 200 Palestinian journalists have been killed while working since October 7. Jake, I'm going to come back to you again to give you right of reply to what's been discussed and also to ask you, is Israel doing enough to prevent civilian deaths?
Well, that's a big question. I tend to think that this is the main focus of the propaganda efforts of Hamas, to convince the world that Israel is wantonly killing civilians. I mean, if we look at the UN's figures for global conflicts, the global average is for 9 civilians to be killed for every combatant. Israel is averaging about 1.5 to 2. that is better than has been achieved by American and British forces in Afghanistan, in Iraq and elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, I've spoken to people who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq who've confirmed that. And so I think if you look at the data and the figures, Israel is managing to restrict the civilian casualties. And we know how they're doing it, by issuing evacuation orders in an extensive way, not just by phone calls and leaflets, but also by dropping speakers, by parachutes and so on and so forth, against an enemy that is purposely trying to place civilians in harm's way. There are enough tunnels, or there were enough tunnels in Gaza to house the entirety of the Gazan population and to keep them safe from any bombardment. And yet not a single Gazan civilian was allowed into those tunnels. Why? Because Hamas wants them to get killed so they can be filmed, that footage can go around the world, and that can influence people's hearts and minds against Israel, reconceiving this not as a democratic country fighting for its security against a jihadi enemy, but as some kind of quote-unquote genocide. And, you know, it's important not to rewrite history here. This did start on October the 7th, I'm afraid. On October the 6th, Gaza was not occupied by Israel. There had been no Israeli presence in Gaza since 2005. So this was not a case of Hamas in some way being framed as some kind of resistance. Hamas governed Gaza since just after 2005, 2007, when it took over. So Israel was not responsible for an occupation there. The Palestinians rejected a two-state solution for the first time in 1947. Let's not forget that. When Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, that was in response to an Arab invasion that tried to destroy Israel, and the Arab armies lost. And so let's not reconstruct this as if Israel is the one who's been obstructing peace. The Arab side has been obstructing peace from the beginning, I regret to say, or the Arab leadership, I should say. And we've seen that again in its rejection of the two-state solution on numerous occasions, including in 2008, when it was offered all of its demands. And yet Mahmoud Abbas, who is currently enjoying, by the way, the 20th year of his 4-year term, failed to take that opportunity. So let's not reframe the history as Israel somehow being the genocidal enemy. This is a case of Hamas. You know, you said just earlier that surely Hamas isn't completely innocent. I would say that Hamas is completely guilty. Hamas started this war with that awful barbarism, which has been completely universally condemned correctly on October the 7th, and prolongs it by holding the hostages. Why doesn't Hamas release the hostages? You know, we've heard that the Israeli public wants all the hostages back, and rightly, but that's not something that the Israeli government can achieve. It's something which Hamas can achieve. The responsibility for this war lies with Hamas. Hamas is a cancer in Palestinian society. It must be destroyed. Gaza must be de-radicalized. We need to try to work towards an era of peace and friendship and solidarity between Israelis and Palestinians, but we cannot do that while Gaza remains in the grip of these evil jihadis who keep these awful, these poor hostages emaciated and suffering and starving underground.
Mukaima, your response to that, to Jake's comments specifically that there was no occupation in Gaza, and also that they are doing everything they can to limit the number of civilian deaths?
Well, unfortunately, Jake here is talking about Hamas propaganda, but in the meantime, he is basically doing the same propaganda for the right wing in Israel. Let me remind Jake that yes, Gaza, there was no Israeli soldiers. Israel withdrew and redeployed its forces from the Gaza Strip in September of 2005. But Israel, between 2005 until 2023, turned Gaza into the largest open-air prison for more than 2 million Palestinians, where they were locked in from out.
That's not true. That's just not true.
Put under siege by the Israeli army. And second, let's not forget the Oslo Agreement, Jake, put West Bank, Gaza as one territorial entity. You cannot just redeploy from the Gaza Strip and say that no more occupation in the Gaza Strip. I mean, occupation continued in the West Bank. Israeli settlement continued in the West Bank. When Oslo was signed in 1993, the number of Israeli settlers were 220,000 Israeli settlers, and now the number of Israeli settlers is more than 700,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. So you cannot just basically say that Israel and the Israeli army withdrew from Gaza and there is no more occupation in Gaza. Now we have to basically here set the record straight with regard to what the Palestinian people have gone through over the past 7 decades since their plight in 1948, when more than 2/3 of the Palestinians were expelled from their homeland and became refugees in the West Bank, Gaza, and also in the neighborhood Arab countries. It seems to me that we are forgetting the plight and the suffering of the Palestinians. And also, I mean, you asked Jake about what happened today in Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, and he went on talking about Hamas propaganda. Now, cameras caught that live, for God's sake. The shooting, the killing of Palestinian journalists, Palestinian members of the fire departments who were rescuing other Palestinian journalists. It was caught on camera. Now the Israelis are trying to investigate that, but there is no way to justify shooting at a Palestinian hospital. Now international law is strict forward with that hospitals are to be protected under international law. Now we have to wait and see who gave the orders to launch that attack against the hospital today. But again, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that there were Hamas operatives who were in that scene that we saw on camera today. It just seemed to me that there is no way you can explain why those journalists and why those Palestinian civilians were killed in Nasser Hospital today.
Okay. Ksenia, I'm going to come to you for response, but just quickly, Jake, if you can, because we are running out of time, just a response to what Mukhaima was saying specifically about that vision that we saw targeting people that were clearly civilian rescue workers and journalists at the Nasser hospital.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely right. You know, there is an investigation going on by the Israeli army. If it turns out that it was intentional and it targeted civilians at a hospital, that would be a war crime, and the people responsible should be tried and sentenced and sent to prison for those crimes. But we don't know yet. The investigation is ongoing. But I think that to characterize Israel as a democracy and the armed forces as a responsible armed forces that follows international law by this particular incident, which may or may not be a war crime, I think is unfair. Every nation, when you deploy 300,000 troops to an active war zone, you always have excesses, you have criminals, you have bad actors in amongst the army. That's the case in the British Army. Let's not forget how those scenes from Iraq, where the British and American armies both, you know, committed torture in the most horrendous ways against Iraqis. So look,
this
you
is
know, malpractice amongst
moral
troops,
army
the reality,
in the face of earth.
unfortunately, even in democratic armies, but Israel is investigating it. There's no equivalence. You must not draw an equivalence between a democratic armed forces and the jihadi butchers who are in charge of Gaza, who started this war, who are keeping the hostages underground.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but Ksenia, I want you to round us out. Give us your take on what you've heard on both sides there, from Mukhaima and from Jake, and also your thoughts on whether journalists are specifically being targeted in this conflict.
Yeah, so I think that to focus, you know, not only on today, but also on the future. We say that, you know, this kind of things happen, like what happened today in Khan Yunis. And again, the army was very quick, just after 3 hours, to say that, yes, the uninvolved persons to be heard. Usually it does so when it understands that there were no real war targets on the spot. And yes, we are waiting for the formal investigation to be concluded and for results to be published. Although many of these investigations, they end with nothing and the results are never published. You know, this is something that happens as well. But at the same time, you know, let us think. So what will happen now, you know, with an attempt to take over Gaza City, another few, maybe months, maybe a year of war, there will be more and more of these incidents. That's for sure. That's what we see. And that's exactly what we warned of after a few months of this war, when a lot of goals were completed, when IDF said, and IDF says repeatedly now for many, many months, we completed all of our military goals. We are going in circles and without an alternative in power in Gaza. When we are talking, Jake, about de-radicalization, who should do this de-radicalization? Certainly not Israel. I do not see any volunteers from across the world, you know, pouring into Gaza Strip and say, yeah, we want to take over. We want to, you know, like be in power there. No, it will be the Palestinians. You have to understand that. So you can, blame Abu Mazen for staying in power for too long, something that his peers in the Arab world doing, all across the region. But you think you also can be smart. You can be, can be smart and you can be right. So if you are smart, you are focusing on the tomorrow. on the future. So I don't want any such incidents like what happened in Khan Yunis to happen. I do not want that after another few months, another dozens or hundreds of dead soldiers and thousands of dead Palestinian civilians. I'm not sorry, definitely about dead Hamas terrorists, that we will say again, well, nothing was achieved. Hamas is still there, and we have to just end this war, just like we have, ended this war in Lebanon at the time. So in order to end it with dignity, to end it, first of all, it had to be ended time ago, but we can't end it now. In an agreement, adopting a variation of a Saudi-Egyptian proposal that was put on the table, and again, it's not for the first time, that proposes an alternative to be in Gaza, a Palestinian alternative that is supported by the whole Arab world, the moderate countries, the Abraham Accord countries, something that Israel should definitely be able to live with. If we would not focus on the alternative today, then yes, we will repeat to this discussion about radicals and jihadists who are ruling Gaza by this name or another name. Today it's Hamas, tomorrow it can be something else. So this is the future I'm fearing for. I live in Israel and I have children that are growing up in Israel.
Okay.
So I want them to be safe. The only way for them to be safe is, for Gaza to be safe and for West Bank to be safe and to have a comprehensive political agreement in the end of that with the Palestinian state at side, not tomorrow, but at some point. So this is what we have to achieve. And not to say, well, another target, another war, another Gaza city, another something like this will bail us out.
Thank you, Ksenia. Just in order of fairness, Jake, before we wrap up, I'll give you the right of reply there to balance out our conversation, and then we'll be out of time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what was said. I mean, you're right. The continuation of the war is an awful thing, but look, it can't finish until the hostages are released. There isn't like there's some deal that to release all the hostages.
They can die during the attempt to
taking.
release them.
That deal just doesn't exist. And the Palestinian Authority, I mean, you said yourself that Abu Mazen corresponds to leaders around the Arab world in ignoring democracy. You would not have a democratic Palestine. But the worst thing about the Palestinian Authority...
But also Egypt and Jordan are not democratic. Jake, look around you. Look around all of the countries around us. They're not democratic either. So what?
Sorry, I believe I was given the moment to respond. The worst thing about the Palestinian Authority is not the fact that it is corrupt and anti-democratic. It's not the fact that it's brutal against its own citizens, by the way, beating them up and even murdering them in custody, as we saw with Nizar Banat a few years ago. The worst thing about it is that it supports terrorism. The Palestinian Authority pays reward money to people convicted of terrorism against Israel. And the idea that it would be a good idea for Israel to seek the Palestinian Authority to be the ruler over Gaza and the West Bank, as an authority which actively supports terror and radicalization, and that would leave Israel more secure, I think is for the birds. Now, look, I agree with you that not enough effort and energy has gone into post-war planning. I think much more energy should have gone into that. But it's very difficult when Hamas retains control over the population. I share your pain. I don't live in Israel. You do. I defer to all of that. And I feel a little bit out of turn speaking to you because you live there and your kids live there and so on and so forth. I've got family there, but I don't live there myself. But nonetheless, it seems from the outside point of view that this war will only come to an end when the hostages are released. That's Hamas's responsibility. All the pressure must be placed on Hamas to achieve that by the international community, not on Israel.
Okay, I wish that we had more time to continue to convey both of these counterpoints to this argument, but unfortunately we are going to have to leave it there. But we appreciate everyone's contribution and all of your time. Thank you to our guests, Ksenia Svetlova, the Executive Director of ROPES, the Regional Organisation for Peace, Economics and Security, Professor Mohaima Abu Sada, the visiting lecturer at Northwestern University, and Jake Wallace-Simons, the Telegraph columnist, broadcaster and author. Thank you all for your time on Counterpoints. And thank you for watching this episode of Counterpoints. Our appreciation also to Ruby Chen, father of Israeli hostage Itai Chen, who joined us earlier in the show. Keep up to date of all our latest debates and interviews by subscribing to Al Arabiya English on YouTube, and be sure to follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.